We're supposed to do animal research before we do people research. In humanized mice, so that was mice that we gave ACE2 receptors to so we could work with them on this. After 2 weeks, 95% of the animals were dead. When we looked at those animals, we saw this under the microscope. This kind of looks like a sponge, right? This is what it's supposed to look like, all this. But this is what happens, and this looks like a sponge, and it's in the brain. So in medicine and science, we call that spongiform encephalopathy. Okay? And the general public calls this mad cow disease. We also know in rhesus macaque monkeys, because those are the closest thing to us to use as a model to see what will happen to us, that in 5 to 6 weeks, when the animals were sacrificed, this part of their brain was infected with the spike protein. And when we looked at their brains, we saw inflammatory cells, and we saw Lewy bodies. That's Alzheimer's disease and other neurologic diseases. These animals didn't have this before they were exposed. This is the result of the spike protein crossing the blood-brain barrier, which is exquisitely good at, and getting to its target. There's a doctor, a PhD by the name of Kevin W. McCarran in Japan, who's done more research. He is probably the world's expert on animal models, on primate models, and these diseases. And for a year, Dr. McCarran has been warning the world that this is going to have, that this spike protein crosses the blood-brain barrier and will have damaging neurologic effects like it did on the monkeys. He's done animal models showing what happens when you damage this part of the brain, and his animal models match exactly this type of damage with neurologic disease. There are scientists around the world trying to address this problem and bring home the information that you need. This is a question we're getting quite a bit of, as if this is a new concept. You maybe have heard of some of the doctors on television talking about shedding, and look at the new Harvard study. I have news for you. In 1995, we knew about shedding from viruses. This is written on the website. This is a 2021 document from the Japanese data on Pfizer. It shows the virus, the vaccinated components, in all the body organs within hours, not just at the site of injection. This is the paper that they're talking about, some of the doctors in the media, about the Harvard study showing that within hours we see virus particles going around the body. I found that fascinating, but not as fascinating as the second part that nobody's talking about. That from a vaccine that only carries the spike protein, it's making antibodies to the nuclear capsid, which is another part of the virus that's not supposedly in the vaccines. You can't make antibodies to something not in your body. So my question is, what's in the vaccines that you're not only making antibodies to the spike protein, but to the nucleocapsid, because their data shows, and that's the key, I think, of this paper, is that there's antibodies to the nucleocapsid. These vaccines must have more in it than just the spike protein, which we're going to see in a moment. And that's not the only paper you should know about, because in 2017, Moderna published a paper using lipid nanoparticles on the influenza vaccine, and it showed that in the animals tested, their lipid nanoparticle vaccine spread into the brain, the bone marrow, the liver, the spleen, and the muscle site where it was injected. 2017, brought to you by Moderna. It also doesn't explain the fact that if shedding doesn't exist, Health and Human Services and the FDA went to a lot of effort to issue a guidance to the industry in August of 2015 when they issued a document on shedding from viral and bacterial vaccines to the industry. and how to test for it. They didn't spend this type of money and time to test for something that they didn't know and exist. This is their document. It's on the website. It also doesn't explain one other important thing. Remember those prion-like diseases we talked about? Your DNA belongs inside of your nucleus or your mitochondria. Your RNA belongs inside of your cells. If your body doesn't see it, it's not a part of your body. Your immune system doesn't see your genetic code because it's not outside of your cells. RNA, outside of your cells, is a prion. The vaccines contain mRNA. Any leakage of that material produces a prion-like disease. The purpose of that video was to point out to you that this affected the entire planet. Didn't matter which country, which nation state, which city you were in, it impacted you. Most people who think that weapons are used for the purpose of killing their enemy. The best weapon doesn't kill your enemy. It demoralizes your enemy. It devastates the enemy. I'm old enough that I had a Vietnam draft number. And the weapons that were chosen at that point in time were a smaller caliber, because it became apparent to us that if you shot and killed an enemy, you took one person off the battlefield. But if you maimed them, used a smaller caliber bullet, you took them and their friends off the battlefield as their friends tried to save you. The best weapon doesn't kill. It devastates and it demoralizes. That video showed an entire planet demoralized, devastated, locked down out of fear. If you think that SARS-CoV-2 was not an effective bioweapon, we can play this again. Masks were promoted from fear. Masks can decrease the transmission from one person to another. And if you're doing surgery with me, I will insist that you wear one. If you're not doing surgery with me, you won't be in the operating room. If you're wearing a mask in a car driving down the street, I'm not certain what you think you are doing. If you're doing surgery while you're in the car driving down the street, you're doing it wrong. All of that aside, what was clear was the panic that occurred in the general population. This divided families, churches, cities, states, countries, and nations against each other. This was a perfect bioweapon.